If you've ever been part of a big new project at work that just fizzled out, you know how frustrating that is. Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the framework designed to stop that from happening. We're talking about organizational change management.
So let's start with a big question, one that should probably keep every leader up at night. Why do so many of these initiatives fail? I mean, you have a brilliant strategy, you've got this great new piece of software, or maybe it's a vital restructuring, you launch it with all this hope and energy, and then nothing really changes. Why does this happen over and over again?
Well, a huge part of the answer comes down to this one single number, 54%.
Yep, you heard that right. A major study by the Katzenbach Center found that just over half of all major change initiatives actually succeed. That means nearly half of these expensive, time-consuming, morale-draining efforts are basically failing. This isn't just a small hiccup, it's a massive, massive problem.
Okay, so if the strategy is smart and the tech works, what on earth is going wrong? Well, here's the secret. The problem isn't usually in the project plan. It's in the people.
And when you really dig into the why behind the failures, the human side of it just becomes crystal clear. Look at this. The biggest barrier by a long shot is what they call change fatigue. People are just plain exhausted. But right behind that, you've got two other huge issues. Nearly half of employees say they just don't understand the change, and a huge chunk of them flat out don't agree with it.
So this is the key takeaway, right? If you want to beat those odds, you can't just manage the project Gantt chart and the budget. You have to lead the people through the transition. And that, my friends, is a completely different skill set that requires a totally different approach. And that is where organizational change management, or OCM, comes into the picture. It gives you the framework to tackle all those human factors head-on.
So what is OCM, really? At its core, it's a toolkit. It's a structured, repeatable way to handle the human side of change. It's about guiding your people from the old way of doing things to the new way and making sure all those benefits you planned for actually happen. And look, this isn't some vague, fluffy concept. It's a concrete process. It all starts with really evaluating the impact of the change and figuring out if the organization is even ready for it. From there, you build a strategy, you develop a detailed plan for things like communication and training, you execute that plan, and, this is crucial, you measure the results to make sure the change actually sticks. But a process is really just a map. Your success comes down to how you lead people through that journey. So let's talk about the core principles that really bring this framework to life. Okay, there are 10 principles in total, but let's just focus on 3 that give you the biggest bang for your buck. First, you absolutely have to start at the top. If your leaders aren't all on the same page and genuinely committed, it's pretty much doomed from the start. Second, involve every single layer. Your frontline staff, they know where the real problems are. Their knowledge is a goldmine. And third, you have to make both the rational and the emotional case for change. A spreadsheet isn't enough. You've got to connect with people's hearts to get real buy-in. But there's one principle that's so powerful and so often overlooked, and it's this: leading outside the lines. You have to remember that real influence in any company doesn't always follow that neat little org chart. This means you have to find your true influencers, the key players who operate outside the formal structure. So you're looking for your pride builders, the people who are just amazing at motivating their peers. You need to identify the trusted nodes. You know who I'm talking about. They're the people everyone goes to when they want to know what's really going on. And finally, you have to find and empower your change ambassadors, the ones who just naturally get it and start living the new way of working. These folks are your secret weapon.
So, now that we get the process and the principles, let's look at the actual tools. There are a bunch of established models out there that you can use to structure your entire approach. Now, the goal isn't to memorize a bunch of models, it's about picking the right tool for the right job. If your change is being driven very clearly from the top down, something like Kotter's 8-step process is a great checklist. If you need to encourage new behaviors from the ground up, nudge theory is fantastic for that. And if your success hinges on every single person making their own personal transition, then AIDCAR is the model you're going to want to reach for.
So let's do a quick deep dive on AIDCAR because it's just an incredibly powerful model for managers. It's all about focusing on the individual's journey through change.
AIDCAR is an acronym for the 5 outcomes that every single person has to achieve. First, they need awareness of why the change is even happening. Then, they need the desire to actually participate. Next comes the knowledge of how to change, followed by the ability to put those new skills into practice. And finally, you need reinforcement to make sure those new habits actually stick. Here's the catch. You can't skip a step. They have to happen in this exact order.
And let's just look at a real-world barrier at that very first step: Awareness. It sounds easy, right? Just send an email. But it's not. You're fighting against comfort with the way things are. You're fighting against rumors, misinformation, even outright denial. Your communication has to be relentless and clear, and it always has to answer that fundamental question, why?
So your job as a leader is to be a guide. You have to actively help each person on your team move through every one of these stages. You take them from understanding the why, to mastering the how, and finally, to making that new way of working feel totally normal.
All right, let's pull all these threads together, because if you only remember one thing from all of this, I want it to be this.
See, project management gives you a plan to execute, but organizational change management, that gives you the framework to lead a human transition. One manages tasks and timelines. The other navigates emotions, habits, and culture. And you absolutely need both to win.
So, I'm going to leave you with a question to really think about. The next time a big initiative lands on your desk, are you going to just focus on the spreadsheets and the deadlines, or are you going to step up, use these principles, and truly lead the people through the change? Because your answer to that question will probably determine whether you end up in the winning 54% or the other 46.